I say, because if I do die, I'm gonna ask the Lord, let me haunt you.
We so often hear about those that don't make it out of danger alive. But what about those that do?
My body got warm and it just said, get up. You're not done, get up.
I'm Caitlin Van Mall, back with a brand new season of I Survived.
The more I begged him, the happier and the more excited he got.
Join me for new episodes of I Survived every Monday, and subscribe now wherever you listen to podcasts.
I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the prosecutors. Today on the prosecutors, we look at all the people who died around the Murdaugh family. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Prosecutors. I'm Brett, and I'm joined, as always, by my still pregnant co-host, Alisa.
The still pregnant and the Alisa are both hilarious. I'm really going to miss when we finish the Murdoch case, and you can't just, pronounce my name in a million different ways. For those of you who are confused, my name is still Alice, and I am still pregnant because we are on a marathon recording session right now. It is a beautiful day outside, but we are recording when the sun is up because who knows how many more hours I have before I have to go deliver this baby. But we care about you. You know what? I care more about you guys than delivering my baby. So we're getting through this case because it's crazy and there's so much to discuss still.
And so you guys, you listened to the last episode and you're like, man, I bet by the next episode, Alice will have had that baby. The problem is we're recording the next episode 5 minutes after we recorded the last episode. So there's been no progress on the baby front, but we'll see.
We had to go we got extra waters and sustenance. Brett went to get water. I went to get chocolates, So we took a 5-minute break and we are back at it.
I also got some more bourbon, so
good
I've
for you.
reloaded on all the.
I'm not going to be judgmental, but it's
fronts.
the sun is high in the sky right now, man.
Hey, it's 5 o'clock somewhere, right?
Not here.
Anyways, and it is a Saturday. Those of you who are wondering whether we're, recording while we should be working.
No, this is the weekend.
Doing this all for y'all.
We just stuck our kids in their rooms hoping they'd nap, which I think none of our kids are napping. So, whatever.
Yeah. Okay. So we've done the timeline. The very long timeline. It took us a couple episodes to get through it, but very important and hopefully very interesting to you. And I got to tell you guys, y'all know us. We don't believe in conspiracies. We throw cold water on conspiracies all the time. We have come to a case that is so crazy and conspiratorial that I'm not sure we're going to be able to do that. And today's the day when we're going to look at the fact that people just seem to die around the Murdaughs with surprising regularity. And whether or not they're involved or not is a question that a lot of people have wondered about. It's obviously a little out of the scope of what's going on in this trial, but I don't think you can talk about this case without talking about some of these incidents. I will say we're only going to scratch the surface of this. There are podcasts that have spent 100 episodes on this case. The Murdaugh murders, the Murdaugh family murders. There's also a podcast by the state newspaper. If you are fascinated by this case, you can spend the next couple months listening to stuff about this and really in-depth stuff. So we're going to scratch the surface. We're going to give you the details of some of this. But if you want a deep dive, deep dives are available. And I don't know, Alice. I mean, when I started looking at this case, I knew it was interesting, but I had no idea the depth of this and how many twists and turns this case would take and just the years of shadiness around Alec Murdaugh and his family in particular.
And I think that's exactly right, Brett. It's not just that the facts surrounding this, whenever you have a husband and a father accused of murdering his own child and wife, it's going to be salacious. But it's those twists and turns and the just years of kind of built up, covered up stuff. You know, that's the best way I can put it, is that there's been so much going on, and it seemed like it was all bubbling and it was a volcano. And right around June is when everything started bubbling over, and all this stuff that had just been simmering below the surface are coming up. And that's why it's so interesting, because it had been successfully covered up, I think, for quite some time. So let's dive into what those things are.
Let's dive into it. And it is so true. We've talked about sort of corruption and long family legacies. And I'm sorry, nothing ever stays buried. At some point, all of your misdeeds are going to come to light. Even if you're able to stave them off for a little while, eventually it's going to come out. And that's what you're seeing here. And it's possible that the murders were just the latest example of that. If you believe the prosecution's theory, then the murders were in part to cover up misdeeds. But this time it didn't work. And not only did we see more information about those misdeeds, but about things we're going to talk about today. And let's start with the boat crash. It's the most relevant to the case itself, and in some ways maybe the least interesting of the strange things that have happened around the Murdaugh family. Now, we've given you some background on that when we were talking about the timeline. You have these friends, they're out for a late night boating excursion, they get really drunk, there's a tragic accident, and a young girl, Malorie Beach, is killed. And look, I'm sure on some level, Alec Murdoch and his father cared about the fact that this young lady was dead, but it was not their primary concern. Their primary concern was protecting their son and grandson, and if I can be cynical, the family name. I think they went into action to try and ensure that whatever the consequences of this were going to be, they were going to fall on Paul as little as possible. You know, this is a situation where you have a man who had been the former solicitor, his son who was working at the local solicitor's office, who immediately are showing up at this hospital where all these kids have been taken, and they're not there for their son. They're there in questioning mode. People talk about what is corruption, what is influence. Corruption is not House of Cards. That's fantasy. Real corruption is being able to do things like your son was just taken to the hospital with a 0.28 blood alcohol level, where a boat that he was probably driving crashed and a young girl who was in the boat is most likely dead. And yet you, as the father and grandfather of that person, are able to interact with the other witnesses to the crime before even the police are able to. That is corruption. That is corruption, and should disturb you, and obviously I think does disturb a lot of people. But they're going into action. They are questioning these survivors, and they're not only questioning them, they are making suggestions about what really happened. And let me just tell you, one reason this is so disturbing is people are really susceptible to being manipulated, and they're really susceptible to having their memories manipulated and to not being sure about things, particularly when they've been drinking, particularly when they've just been involved in a really traumatic event. And I don't know if y'all have ever been in a situation where you were asked to remember something that was really important and somebody put a lot of pressure on you to do it. Because I have been in this situation. And to the extent that I was almost convinced that something that had not happened had happened, because I could not remember exactly how it went down. And it turned out later that it had not happened the way that I was worried it had happened, because that would have been bad for me. And it had happened a different way, and there was like other evidence of how it went down. And I was like, wow, that's good, because I was almost convinced that it went down the other way. And that's exactly what you're seeing here. You're seeing a situation where you have all these kids who are going to be asked very soon to tell the police what happened, who was driving. That's the most important thing. And what are Alec and his father doing? They are telling these kids that it wasn't Paul that was driving the boat, not at the time of the wreck. That in fact, it was Connor Cook, who was another one of the people on that boat. And the story they tell essentially goes that Paul was in an argument with his girlfriend at the time, and that Connor had sort of taken over driving the boat. And that what happened is there's some argument between Connor and Paul, and maybe Connor's not paying attention and he accidentally wrecks the boat, and that's how it went down. That's going to be the story that the defense is going to tell. It's essentially what they say on the HBO documentary. If you've watched it, you'll see one of the lawyers for Alec Murdaugh today, the same one who wrote that Washington Post article, telling this story, that that's how it went down, that Connor was actually driving, and he was going to win that case. He was going to get Paul off because Paul wasn't driving the boat, and they were going to prove that at trial. And what does he point to support that position? He points to the police reports that were taken by the police right after the wreck. I say right after the wreck. In fact, it was right after they had talked to Alec and his father. Now the kids are talking to the police, and they are confused about who's driving. They're saying things like, I'm not sure anymore, and maybe it was Connor. Even Connor couldn't say who was driving the boat, and that was the evidence that they were going to point to in Paul's trial. So really, it was kind of working out exactly they wanted it to. They had confused the only witnesses to this. And as we've told you 1,000 times, those statements you make to the police right after an event are so important, because if you change them later on, that you're going to be undermined by those. And the question is going to be, why is it the thing you told close to the accident is now different than the thing you're saying on the stand? So to the extent they wanted to do that, they accomplished their mission.
Indeed. And, this is really why you try to get to your witnesses as soon as possible. So it's not a surprise that these kids who have gone through a lot are just totally confused as to what happened.
Yeah. And the lawyer's Jim Griffin, by the way. I keep forgetting his name. But he was the lawyer for both Paul and now for Alec, which is interesting. It's not actually a conflict of interest, but it's always interesting when you represent somebody, they get murdered. Now you're representing their accused murderer. But in any event, he's obviously been attached to the family for a long time and is committed to them and was committed to the fact Paul was innocent. And we'll tell you that. But I think it looks a lot like these kids were manipulated. And it wasn't just that. We also know that a family member of the Murdaughs had ended up carrying the boat off for law enforcement. Law enforcement didn't have a trailer to put the boat on. So where are they going to get a trailer? Well, one of the Murdaughs is like, we'll do it. We'll tow it for you. That's the way to preserve the evidence, I'm sure. So he got towed off by them, and Paul's clothing, his cell phone, and other items somehow just disappear. Evidence that would have been very valuable in figuring out exactly how this goes down are just lost. Wouldn't you know it, coincidences just mount in cases involving the Murdaughs. So it's questionable how this trial is going to go. But it doesn't end there. There are two aspects to this case. There's the criminal aspect, and there's the civil aspect. Now, I think the Murdaughs felt pretty secure that they could handle the criminal aspect, that they were going to be able to manipulate this case one way or the other and secure Paul's freedom. Duffy Stone has recused, which, was what he should have done. So they're not going to necessarily be able to manipulate the prosecution, because it is going to be a out-of-towner state AG's office that's going to be prosecuting this case. So that's going to be a little bit more difficult. But it is going to take place in their home county, probably in front of a judge who's going to be friendly to them. And they've compromised so much of the evidence that proving beyond a reasonable doubt that Paul was driving the boat is going to be difficult. Maybe it's impossible. Maybe with the questionable statements of these kids, it is going to be impossible to prove that. But there's something they can't control, and that's the civil aspect of this case. If you have a good lawyer handling this case, it may not even matter who's driving, because you're going to sue Paul, of course. But Paul's not the one with the money. Alec is. And Alec's the one who owns the boat. And whoever was driving that boat at the time would have been underage, would have been drinking, and it would have been a circumstance that Alec would have allowed to happen.
And that's typically the case too, right? Because his experience and his pull is in the solicitor's office. But on the civil side, when money is involved, it's kind of hard to pull the strings there, because you don't have, it's not just based on witness testimony. It's based on financial records. Exactly.
And unlike the criminal case, where you're going to have to prove this beyond a reasonable doubt. In order to convict Paul, you're going to have to prove that Paul, beyond a reasonable doubt, was the one who was driving that boat when it crashed. That's what you're going to have to prove. And if you can't prove that, Paul's going to win. And you may have already undermined that. Civil's going to be different. Yes, of course, Paul's going to be sued. He's going to be named in the lawsuit. But he's not the one with the money. And he's not the one who owned the boat. That's Alec. And really, if Alec was aware that Paul was taking the boat out and getting drunk with his friends and letting his friends on the boat and letting his friends drive the boat, and Alec allowed that situation to continue, it's not going to matter at the end of the day whether Paul was driving the boat or somebody else was. Paul is still going to be partially responsible, and therefore Alec is going to be responsible. And that is a way to get at him and to get his money. And if you have a smart lawyer, smart plaintiff's attorney, someone like we saw on the stand with Mark Tinsley, who testified, who in fact ended up representing the Beaches, you can see how you'd be terrified of that guy. That guy knew exactly what he was doing and exactly how to get the most out of whoever he's going after. There are people who did not like him, but I'll tell you when you would like him, when he's your lawyer. You know, he might be somebody who rubbed people the wrong way at times, but when he's your lawyer, you're going to love that. And that's who he was. But he was not the person who represented the Beaches in the immediate aftermath of this crime. Remember, all these people had known each other for a very long time. And so Alec is going to get his own friend involved, Corey Fleming. And Corey Fleming is going to represent Connor Cook. He is one of Alec's best friends. He is also the godfather to one of his children. Now, Connor's parents didn't know that. They had been friends with the Murdochs. They trusted the Murdochs. And they went along with this at first. And they had this person represent their son, who in fact did not have his interests at heart. Instead, his whole purpose was going to be to undermine this case, to cast blame on Connor and not Paul. At the same time, the Murdochs are working on the Beach family, trying to convince them that this is not something that should continue to any kind of lawsuit, but something they can deal with outside of court. The very last thing they want are either the Cooks or the Beaches asking too many questions about how this went down and asking too many questions about the Murdaughs' finances. Fortunately, the Beaches didn't listen. They went out and got a competent lawyer, and Connor's family realized what was happening, and they went and got a competent lawyer. But this will not be the last time that Corey Fleming will appear in this saga.
That's just so dirty, Brett. Like, getting your own friends involved. I mean, everyone is bound by the model rules of conduct, lawyers, I mean. And you know, ethically, you are supposed to be looking out for the best interest of your client. And to suggest kind of your friends to be representing people who will have interests that conflict with your own interests is a huge no-no in the legal field. I mean, this is not how lawyers typically roll, just so you guys know. This is not the way lawyers are supposed to roll.
And if you want to know who Corey Fleming is, if you've been watching the trial and you saw the third interview with the SLED investigators with Alec Murdaugh, he's the guy who's there with Alec Murdaugh, who's being very aggressive with the SLED investigators, asking them things like, is he a suspect? We want information. How could you think he's guilty of this? He's being very aggressive in defending Alec because he's his good buddy. And the notion that that person could have represented Connor Cook when the interests are so directly opposed between the Murdochs and Cook is just mind-blowing. And as we've said, there's so much true corruption in this case, the real sort of corruption, that it should be a learning experience for everybody, because this is how it really works. You know, like I said, things like, you know, House of Cards or whatever, I mean, that's television. This is the real world, and it's just as pernicious. And in fact, even more so sometimes because it's harder to identify. You don't have sort of the black and white evil that you have. You have this sort of behind the scenes thing working to ensure that justice isn't done. But it's not going to work here, which doesn't mean that things go exactly the way they should. These are serious charges. There is a girl who is dead, and Paul has been accused of that. Despite that, he is going to be released on a $50,000 bond. He walks out of jail on the day he's arraigned a free man. In fact, he's not even handcuffed. And when they take his mugshot, they do it in the hall rather than taking him down to the local jail to do it. People were upset by this because they thought, here we go. This is the Murdochs doing their thing, ensuring that no punishment is going to come to this person because he's a part of their family and they protect their own. And it wasn't the first time that the people of the area had seen things like this that seemed fishy and seemed like the non-Murdochs, the little people who didn't matter, bad things are going to happen to them, but the last thing we're going to have is any kind of responsibility to the Murdochs for their role in the bad things that happen.
Yeah, and it certainly seems that way, right? I mean, you can imagine how it's not meant to be big C corruption. It's just that you do know the policeman who's supposed to go fingerprint you and take you down to the cell where you're treated like, lo and behold, a criminal, where they take precautions to make sure you don't run away. And that means handcuffs. That means, bolted doors in order to take your mugshot. And instead it's like an Instagram photo that he gets to take out in the hallway. And the reason that matters is I don't think that Paul necessarily, you could see his smirk in his mugshot. There is not the kind of level of severity taking your photo in the hallway as it is to go down into the dungeons, because it is the dungeons. Like, it's usually where there are no windows to prevent, any potential escape, to be fingerprinted and to actually have a proper mugshot. And they may do that just because, I've known your daddy for 20 years, I trust you. Let's just take the picture here. It's not meant to be like big C corruption, but you can see how not everyone gets those sort of courtesies when they are in contact with the criminal justice system. And that quickly can turn into much bigger issues of whether Paul will ever be held accountable for these charges.
And let me say this. I don't think Paul was a monster. People present Paul as a monster sometimes. If you've seen the Hulu documentary, I think it's Hulu. It's on one of the channels. It's not the HBO documentary. It's the other one. They have this random woman from Hampton County who is one of the people who they talk to throughout the documentary. It's unclear who she is or what connection she has to anybody, but she is perfectly happy talking trash about the Murdochs, and particularly Paul. I mean, she basically describes Paul as just this psychopathic monster. That's how she presents him. During the trial, I think you've really seen the humanization of Paul through his text messages, which we've read, through the testimony of his friends, who all seem like fine people. You see that Paul he wasn't a monster, but I think Paul definitely had a feeling of invincibility, and he had a feeling that he could do whatever he wanted because he was a Murdoch, and he would be able to get away with it. And it led to things happening like the boat case, where he can get as drunk as he wants. It's his boat. He can do whatever he wants, and there's not going to be any consequences. And that, I think, the worst things that Paul did and the bad things in his life came from that. And it wasn't just his family telling him that. He's seeing it reinforced by the actions of people around him who should have treated him like anybody else, but didn't because of who he was.
And that's just, that is a big deal, right? For any of us, that would be a big deal to have been driving a boat and causing a crash, or I guess that's what's up for debate, but be part of a boat crash where one of your closest friends dies. This is incredibly traumatic. I don't know how Paul was dealing with it, but I don't think that that doesn't affect you in some way. And here's the thing. I know, there's a lot of weird twists and turns in the story, but this is not the only death surrounding the Murdochs. And that's why I think people have been fascinated with this case. Let's turn our attention to Stephen Smith. 3:57 a.m. on July 8th, 2015. So we're taking you back in time. A man driving down the road in the middle of the night sees someone laying in the roadway who's not moving. And as you'd expect, he calls 911, and the man in the middle of the road is Stephen Smith. He's only 19 years old. And because of where he is, the middle of the road, the police believe that it was a hit and run. But the responding highway patrol noticed that there's no glass, no fragments of a wreck, no indication really that there was in fact, a hit and run. But Stephen Smith is lying there, motionless, lifeless, with blood all around him. And the sheriff and the coroner determined that his body must have been in a wreck because he's dead. It's kind of Occam's razor. This man is found in the middle of the road and he's dead and there's blood around him. Even if there's no glass or, bits of car pieces, that is the most likely reason that he is now dead. It must have been a car wreck. Now, this is unusual as the sheriff's department is not ordinarily the agency that would make that call. And according to Stephen's twin sister, there's something more here. She doesn't believe that he was just walking in the middle of the road. Why would he be walking in the middle of the road? And that this was a hit and run. Rather, his sister has a different theory. And at the time that she's talking about this theory, I think a lot more people think it sounds conspiratorial than it being rooted in fact. Because what she says is that people who live in this town, they have no special connections. They're not the well-to-do in the town. There's no reason that Stephen's death should pique anyone's interest other than the family's. But Randy Murdaugh, Alec's brother, so Randy Murdaugh IV, actually calls Stephen's parents and does something a little strange. He asks for Stephen's electronics and the passwords to them, and he offers to represent the Smiths for free. And an investigator from the Murdaugh law firm actually shows up at the scene of where Stephen's body is found. And the troopers are on the scene, they're kind of processing the scene, and they prevent this investigator from really coming onto the scene. But Stephen's twin sister notes that it seems strange that the Murdaughs, who didn't have seemingly any connection to the Smiths or Stephen, knew that Stephen died even before half of his own family knew he had died.
There's a couple things that are interesting about this. I mean, number one, notice sort of the competing law enforcement here. The local guys, the sheriffs and the sheriff's office, they're all like, oh yeah, this is hit and run. Who knows who did it? Might as well just close up this scene and be done with it. The highway patrol, though, the state agency, they're the ones who normally investigate these kind of crimes. And they're getting muscled out by the locals. Why is that important? You can talk about the Murdochs and you talk about corruption and power and everything else, and they were powerful in the state. I'm not saying they weren't, but they were far more powerful in the local area. At the end of the day, the folks in the capital, they might care about you a little bit if you're the most powerful person in the middle of nowhere part of the state, but they don't care about you that much. And they certainly don't care about you as much as the people who rely on you. So if you're somehow involved in this, you don't want them coming in. You want it to be investigated by the locals. And if those of you who've been watching the trial, you know about the coroner now. You know about just how qualified that guy is to do anything. He was the defense's first witness, and he could not have come off as more of a bumbling know-nothing than he did. He is only the latest indictment of the coroner's position in the United States. The coroner is an elected position. You don't even have to be a doctor to do it. I'm not sure why we still have it.
So weird.
It's only the most important thing anyone at a crime scene can do, being the person who examines the body, and yet we pick just random Joe off the street. So his word means nothing in this case. And as Alice said, there's a lot of weird things going on here. The only connection, seemingly, between the Murdochs and Stephen Smith is, I think, Randy or Alec, one was the coach of his t-ball team. I don't even remember who the coach of my t-ball team was. And I'm pretty sure if I get hit by a car, that guy wouldn't show up. So it's weird that he's doing this. Now, my understanding is Randy has basically denied this. And so there's sort of a fight between the Smiths and Randy about whether or not this happened and when it happened. But there are highway patrol people who confirm this last part that Alice was talking about, that one of their investigators, while they're on the scene, shows up from the Murdaugh firm. Maybe this is, you could imagine this is just ambulance chasing at its finest. You have a dead kid in the middle of the road. There might be some money here to be had, and they realize that, and so they want to jump on this, because if they can figure out that it was like a long-haul trucker that hit him, they can make a lot of money. Maybe that's the best you can say about this. But it certainly seems strange, and it only gets stranger. Now, as we talked about, Stephen's body is found in the middle of the road. That's a little weird. Ordinarily, people don't walk down the middle of the road. Ordinarily, they walk down one side or the other. And if they get hit, they don't end up in the middle of the road. They get thrown to one side or another. But he's in the middle of the road. His car was 3 miles away, parked on the side of the road. It was not running. The gas cap was off. And in fact, it appeared to not have any gasoline in it. So it appeared that it had run out of gas, and that's what had happened. People are going to question that later, but that's sort of the initial belief.
And by the way, I have unfortunately tested the fates of, the driving guides and definitely run out of gas on the side of the road before. I know very clearly when I've run out of gas, your indicator's on, your car kind of sputters. Without a gas carton or gas in my trunk or anything, I don't take the gas cap off. There's nothing I can do to look into the gas tank to verify that the gas is in fact empty. When that's happened to me, I have walked to a gas station before and I had to buy a gas, container where I'm going. But I think this is almost like two on the nose. It's like Hansel and Gretel trying to leave those breadcrumbs, like In case you were wondering what's happening, look at the gas cap. It's off. Wonder if it was something with the gas cap. Everyone reacts differently, but I just note that usually you have other indicators. And the least good indicator of whether you're out of gas is looking into that little hole where the nozzle goes, which would involve removing your gas cap.
See, Alice, this is why I love you so much. People ask sometimes whether we ever disagree on anything. The answer is no, because we share one brain. We're just with the same mind.
You think
and that
this
is exactly
what you do.
That was just like I was literally going to say, it's just too on the nose. It's too pat. It's like, it's literally the perfect setup.
It's almost like someone has spray painted arrows on the car to say, look over here. Don't look at these other things happening. Just look at this gas cap because that must be what's happening next. Don't you think, storyteller?
If there had been a sign saying, I ran out of gas, it couldn't have been more sort of perfectly set up to be like, obviously you ran out of gas.
But with like a phrase before it. I was not murdered, I ran out of gas.
If you find my body, I was obviously hit by a car while looking for gas. And faking someone running out of gas is not the easiest thing to do, but it's not impossible either. If you're going to cover up a murder, you might be willing to do just that. But that's the situation. The gas cap's off. His car's out of gas. It's sitting on the side of the road. He obviously has blunt force trauma to his head. I mean, that's what killed him. But here's the weird thing. The injuries were almost entirely to his head. Other than some scrape wounds on his arms, there's no other evidence that he was hit by a car. Y'all may remember we talked about Patrick Vassy, and we went through sort of all the injuries he had and what exactly had happened to him. We were talking about the Murray case. And we talked about things like paint transfer. We talked about the fact that there was sort of glass embedded in his body. We talked about the fact that he was knocked out of his shoes. And this was a hit and run that he, number one, survived. And number two, was at a relatively low speed, apparently. You don't see any of that here. There's no glass in the body, and you almost always have some sort of shattering of glass, particularly if you're laying in the middle of the road, because if you're laying in the middle of the road, that means you're probably walking in the middle of the road. And if you were walking in the middle of the road, what part of the car would you be hit by? You would be hit by the left side of the car where the headlights are. So what you would expect is when that hit happens, there's shattering of glass. There should be glass around you or on the body, but you don't have any of that. There's also no tire marks. So whoever did this, they didn't brake. If it was a hit and run, they hit and they kept going, which is a little weird because even when people are surprised and hit someone and decide to keep going, they usually slam on their brakes immediately after the hit. So even if you don't see tire treads running up to the injury, you'll often see them running away from the injury. Then the person hits the gas and heads off. You don't see that here. So if this was a hit and run, this person hit them and didn't think anything of it and just kept going. There's also no paint transfer. So even if you think, well, maybe there was just nothing shattered, it's really hard to get hit by anything and not have some paint transfer. But you don't have that here. You also have a pool of blood, which you don't normally have when someone gets hit by a car because they don't get hit and then drop down where they're hit. They get hit and then they're thrown some distance and the blood trails after them. They may end up in a pool of blood, but there's going to be a lot of blood leading up to that. You don't have any of that. There's no evidence that the body tumbled down the road after it hit. It seems like it just dropped. It was like if it was dropped from the sky. Just right here into this spot where the blood pooled around it, and there's no evidence of how it got there at all. Stephen's shoes, which were basically slip-on sneakers, are still on his feet. People who have shoes tied to their feet often will be found without shoes. Go back to the Patrick Vassy case. You literally get knocked out of your shoes when you get in a hit and run. They are still on his feet. His phone is still in his pocket, just slipped loosely into his pocket, no damage to it at all. All the evidence of this, from the injuries on the body, there's no injuries to his legs, no injuries to his lower body, only his head. How do you get hit by a vehicle and only have injuries to your head? You'd almost have to imagine that he got hit by like a really tall truck and it was going by him in like just the rear view window, like smacked him in the head or something. But even then, there's no shattered glass, which you would expect in that circumstance. So there's no injuries that you would expect. He's not tumbled down the road. There's no blood trail. There's no shattered glass. There's no paint transfer. There's no tire treads leading up to the body or leading away from the body. All the evidence from the scene, despite what the coroner and the sheriff might tell you, points to a body drop, points to someone who killed this man and then dropped him in the middle of the road, hoping that whoever came upon him would assume it was a hit and run. Guys, we are back with one of our favorite games, June's Journey. June's Journey is one of those games that will take hold of you and you will enjoy it every second you have. There are few things as captivating as unraveling a family mystery. Those of you who listen to True Crime, you know that solving a mystery can be one of the most enjoyable things you do. And with as many twists and turns as June's Journey brings you, you will enjoy it. You play as June Parker and investigate beautifully detailed scenes set in the decadent 20s to solve your sister's murder. With a mystery that runs that deep, you'll keep coming back to explore new scenes, knowing the next clue is always in reach. And there are more than 8,000 scenes full of hidden clues, and there's always something new to discover. Meet an intriguing character in Chapter 2 and decide if he's friend or foe. Reach Chapter 5 to hunt down your first international clues in a lush locale. If you like this show, you will love June's Journey. So pick up where you left off to uncover new secrets or start your investigation today and download June's Journey. Available on Android and iOS mobile devices, as well as on PC through Facebook Games. The Prosecutors is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Let's face it, sometimes multitasking can be overwhelming. Like when your favorite podcast is playing and the person next to you is talking and your car fan is blasting, all while you're trying to find the perfect parking spot. But then again, sometimes multitasking is easy, like quoting with Progressive Insurance. They do the hard work of comparing rates so you can find a great rate that works for you, even if it's not with them. Give their nifty comparison tool a try, and you might just find getting the rate and coverage you deserve is easy. All you need to do is visit Progressive's website to get a quote with all the coverages you want, like comprehensive and collision coverage or personal injury protection. Then you'll see Progressive's direct rate, and their tool will provide options from other companies all lined up and ready to compare, so it's simple to choose the rate and coverages you like. Press play on comparing auto rates. Quote at Progressive.com to join the over 29 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Comparison rates not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy. Guys, we've all had that problem where something's wrong in your health and you just don't know who to go to. And you're texting your group chat and you're Googling it. But the one thing you don't have is a doctor. And you're extremely unlikely to find quality medical advice on your group chat or from Google. That's where ZocDoc comes in. There are thousands of medical professionals on ZocDoc there to help you. They listen like a friend and give you the expert care you need. ZocDoc is the only free app that lets you find and book doctors who are patient-reviewed, take your insurance, are available when you need them, and treat almost every condition under the sun. No more doctor roulette or scouring the internet for questionable reviews. With ZocDoc, you have a trusted guide to connect you to your friend, to connect you to your favorite doctor you haven't met yet. Millions of people use ZocDoc's free app to find and book a doctor in their neighborhood who is patient-reviewed and fits their need and schedule just right. Go to ZocDoc.com/prosecutors and download the ZocDoc app for free. Then find and book a top-rated doctor today. Many are available within 24 hours. That's ZocDoc.com, ZocDoc.com/prosecutors. ZocDoc.com/prosecutors. Hey everybody, if you're looking for a go-to for all your grocery and household essentials with the convenience of getting it all quickly shipped to your doorstep, Thrive Market is for you. You guys know I do like the keto, and sometimes it can be hard to find keto-friendly foods in the stores, and that's one reason I love Thrive Market. I'm able to find all sorts of low-carb options and save money on every single order. In fact, you can average over 30% each time you order. And on top of the massive savings, Thrive Market has the deals page that changes daily, gives me cash back on so many brands, and have a price match guarantee. Not only does Thrive Market save me money, but they also save me time. I love the filters on their website. Whether you're looking for gluten-free snacks or non-toxic cleaning essentials or keto foods, you can curate your own shopping experience with the click of a button. Join Thrive Market today and get 30% off your first order plus a free $60 gift. Go to thrivemarket.com/prosecutors. for 30% off your first order, plus a free $60 gift. That's THRIVE market.com/prosecutors. thrivemarket.com/prosecutors. We've said it before, but HelloFresh is one of our favorite sponsors for a reason. With HelloFresh, you get farm fresh, pre-portioned ingredients and seasonal recipes delivered right to your doorstep. There's a reason it's America's #1 meal kit, and if you try it, you will know. I've talked about the firecracker meatballs before. I absolutely love them. My wife and I make them all the time. It is not an exaggeration to say that the day the HelloFresh box shows up on our doorstep is one of our favorite days of the week. And it's not just good food. You can save money too. We all know it. The cost of groceries is going sky high, and now is the perfect time to get started with HelloFresh. HelloFresh is cheaper than grocery shopping and 25% less expensive than takeout. And because all those ingredients are pre-portioned, and because you have that handy-dandy recipe, you're not wasting food, which is so important these days. And HelloFresh knows you're busy. That's why they take care of the meal planning and prepping, freeing up extra time in your schedule. If you're interested in trying HelloFresh, go to HelloFresh.com/TP60 and use code TP60 for 60% off plus free shipping. That's HelloFresh.com/TP60 and code TP60 for 60% off plus free shipping, and find out for yourself why HelloFresh is America's #1 meal kit. You know, when it comes to personal hygiene, who has time to read that long list of ingredients on the back of the bottle? Some ingredients I can't even pronounce. If you're like me and you care about what goes on your body, and maybe you got some sensitive skin, now's the time to try Native personal care products just like I did. You know Native for their aluminum-free deodorant. Native keeps their ingredients list bare naked with ingredients you understand like coconut oil, shea butter, and baking soda. When you use Native, you will smell amazing all day long thanks to your long-lasting scents. Want to smell spicy and woodsy or clean and fresh? Native has a scent option for everyone. I know I'm a big fan of the limited edition cabin collection of warm cider and cinnamon, cashmere and rain, toasted marshmallow and vanilla, and wildwood and cardamom. As I've said before, I have sensitive skin. Not all deodorants will work for me, but Native is perfect. And it's time for you to make the switch from an antiperspirant to Native. When you visit their site, you can discover all their fresh scents and maybe even try out one of their body washes while you're at it. Smell and feel fresh all day long with Native. Get 20% off your first order by going to nativedeo.com/prosecutors or use promo code prosecutors at checkout. That's nativedeo.com/prosecutors or use code prosecutors at checkout for 20% off your first order.
Just you describing his injuries and the state of his body is so stark. You're right. When you're walking, you go stand next to your car. The bulk of your body that would come in contact with a car, the part that sticks out in a car, the hood of the car, is going to be the middle part of your body. Really doesn't matter how tall you are, right? From as short as I am and to as tall as you are. It's going to be somewhere in the middle of our body. It would be quite difficult to targetedly hit someone in the head who's walking in the middle of the road and not throw your body anywhere, even to the amount where it would just scratch your legs. Not a scratch on the legs, not from being dragged. And that's another thing you typically see, like drag marks, because your body gets caught on something. And he was clearly hit with such blunt force that it killed him. So it wasn't a light tap. And it wasn't like the door of the car was opened, even though the door, if the car was open, would still hit you in the middle of the body, not your head, and not disturb what's in your pockets. That is just mind-boggling. Let's go back to the timeline we talked about last time. Supposedly, remember, after Paul had been shot and he was laying dead on the ground, Alex said he ran up to his son's body, tried to turn him around, and that small movement of turning around his body supposedly made the phone in Paul's pocket fall out, which is why Alex said he had to touch the phone, and then he put it down because he thought it was a bad idea. Yet, Stephen Smith's body can be hit with such force that it kills him, and nothing is disturbed about the phone in his pocket. It doesn't get, pushed out of his pocket. It doesn't get shattered. It doesn't get a crack in it. Nothing. And the shoe thing is really, really important. Shoes come off the easiest on your body because if you think about the way your foot is shaped, really it just takes like a small little lever on the heel part to be able to kick off a shoe, right? That's why you can kick off your shoes with the toe of your foot as opposed to have to bend down every time and take your shoe off because of the angle of your foot. Every other part of your body involves some sort of limb or hole that you have to maneuver your shirt or your pants or socks or underwear or bra, whatever, through, but not your shoes. Your shoes are they only stay on because of the angle of your foot. And that's why they're so easily disturbed. And that's why they are typically found first when you're searching for a body. So if you're running away or you're attacked by an animal, by a person, you're in a car accident, your shoes typically are separated from your body, and we often see that. I think we saw this in the Delphi case. You find shoes before you find the body because they typically get separated from the body. Again, here, Stephen gets hit with such force that he's killed, yet shoes tied perfectly on his feet. Is it possible? Sure, but it kind of defies all other crime scenes that we see of this nature.
Look, if you had a bunch of other evidence, and I'm happy to be corrected by someone who has more information and everything we just said is wrong. But if he'd had injuries to his torso and there was glass and a blood trail and his shoes were still on his feet, okay, I guess somehow the shoes managed to stay on his feet. But the fact that there is the only reason you would think this person was involved in a hit and run is because his body was found in a road. That's it. That is the only piece of evidence that leads you to think this is a hit and run. Every other piece of evidence indicates this was not a hit and run. So it's one of those things where, is it possible to be hit and there be no glass? Yes. Is it possible to be hit and there's no blood trail? Yes. Is it possible to be hit and there's no other injuries? Yes. Is it possible to be hit and your shoes don't fly off? Yes. But when you combine all those things together, it just becomes astronomically high, the probability that this wasn't a hit and run. This was not, in my mind, this was not a hit and run. He was murdered and his body was dumped there. The Murdaughs might not have had anything to do with it. Just because a bad thing happens in Hampton County doesn't mean the Murdaughs had anything to do with it. We'll talk more about that in a second. But he was murdered. And I just don't think there's any question. And there was no question in the minds of the highway patrol officers who looked into this either, that this was unnatural, whatever happened to him. And I think the more you learn about it, the more you realize something weird was going on here. 2 weeks before his death, according to his sister, he started to act strange. He wasn't the same sort of happy-go-lucky guy that he always was. Something was weighing on him and something was worrying him. The day before he was hit, his car wouldn't start. I guess his sister was a little bit more handy with cars than he was because she looked in his car, looked under the hood, and noticed that the battery cables were loose. They weren't attached. And obviously, if your battery's not attached to your car, you can't start your car. So she sort of hooked it back up and then it could go. The next day, the car is out of gas. Now, we talked about this just a few minutes ago about how weird it is. You just leave the gas cap off as if you're just saying, hey, my car's out of gas. I need gas. But here's the thing that someone didn't figure on. Stephen didn't take his wallet with him. His wallet was still in his car with his money and his credit cards. So if Stephen was going to buy gas, he was missing a very important thing, the ability to buy it, which just seems like a pretty strange thing. Now, you might just say, well, maybe he just forgot it. Bad luck for him when he shows up at the gas station and doesn't have any money. The problem is he'd have to actually be walking towards the gas station in order for that to happen. But where his body was not towards one of the very few gas stations in the area. It certainly wasn't in the direction of the closest one. So nothing about the circumstances surrounding this. In addition to the physical evidence on the scene, nothing about the circumstances surrounding him leaving to buy this gas points to this being a legitimate story, that he ran out of gas and he's walking down the street and he gets hit by a car. And this is, we talk about circumstantial evidence. People poo-poo that. If you're feeling convinced by this, but you're not normally convinced by circumstantial evidence, this is all circumstantial evidence. This is all of these little things are adding together. Little things that maybe alone wouldn't tell you anything. But when you add them all together, you're starting to get a story here. And the story is Stephen Smith wasn't involved in a hit and run. So the highway patrol, they keep looking, but they had almost no information. They kept hearing rumors that somehow the Murdaughs were involved. And that's all they were, is they were rumors. They didn't come with a lot of proof. It was, well, this person told me that they heard this is what happened. The troopers, they kept trying to nail this down, but it seemed like they would talk to people and they would think, okay, this is going to be a witness. We're going to learn something. And then they would just sort of disappear from town, possibly because they were paid to do so. That's the conspiracy theory people jump to. And in this case, it might be true. This happens more than you would think, where you're an officer and you get a witness and the witness tells you a great story and you try and confirm it, and all of a sudden they've just vanished into thin air. They won't talk to you. They tell everybody they know not to talk to you. Sometimes that just happens because people who initially tell you a story or even tell you the truth decide they don't want to be involved. You know, this is too big, it's too heavy, I don't want to be involved. So that does happen. So it's not necessarily that they were paid off. It could just be they realized what they'd gotten themselves into and they tried not to be involved in this. Now, Paul has been the person we've talked about the most. He was the one who was involved in the boating accident. He's the one that people seem to knock the most. But in this case, it's Buster's name that keeps coming up. The story on the street that people told the police, which I don't buy, but is what they told them, is that there were 2 or 3 men in a vehicle and that Buster was one of them. They see Stephen walking. He's walking down the road. He's going to get some gas. They turn around and they follow him. They pass him and someone threw something at him that hit him in the head. Exactly what happened is unclear. And frankly, I think that's a dumb story that somebody made up just to account for the physical evidence on the scene, and they wanted to stick Buster in it or whatever. The other story was that Stephen was beaten with a bat or a 2x4 and then thrown out of a truck onto the scene. That seems more consistent with the evidence and seems consistent with everything you see in the autopsy. This is a lot of trauma to the head, which obviously happens in these hit and runs because you get thrown and you land on your head, or when you get hit by the car, you roll over the car and you hit your head. It's just that you also tend to see a lot of other injuries around you. The hitting of the head is actually the second or third or fourth thing that happens to you. You get banged up everywhere else and then your head hits the ground and that's what kills you. But all we see with him is the injuries to the head, and that seems much more consistent with the beating than with a hit and run.
So the big question is why? Why Stephen? It's not apparent his connection with the Murdaughs, with Buster. Why would Buster, who we've hardly heard anything about right now, be involved in this brutal beating of just some kid, some 19-year-old? So let's talk about Buster, because Buster was Paul's older brother, and Buster was, like probably in a lot of families, the oldest son. He was supposed to follow in his father's footsteps in the law. And it actually surprised people that Buster would be part of the chatter around town involved with this crime. Because even though people seem to be, down on Paul, that he was this arrogant, privileged young boy, that's not the same reputation that Buster seemed to have around town. He seemed to be much more quiet, and he didn't flaunt, his privilege maybe as much as his younger brother. And the fact that it was, a Twitter about town that Buster may have been involved was actually surprising. But then what happened next kind of surprised some people, and maybe as confirmation bias, they started to think that Buster did have something to do with it, because Buster was supposed to go to law school, and he was, on the straight and narrow to follow and be part of this law firm, maybe solicitor one day or a volunteer solicitor in the town. But instead of doing that and following on his career path, Buster just sort of disappeared after Stephen's body was found. He stopped getting on Facebook, and it was unclear where he went or where he was, but he wasn't in town. He was supposed to go to law school, but he only went for 1 year. And I think he actually got kicked out of law school, or he never went back, and he never got his law degree. What does this have to do with Stephen? So Stephen, we don't know much about him yet, right? We know that he's a 19-year-old who's been found dead. He has a twin sister, so he's family, and he's close with his family. One other interesting thing about Stephen, and it's only interesting because of a potential, view into what may have happened to him, is that he was gay. Investigators heard that Stephen was actually planning on going deep sea fishing with a, quote, prominent person, and he was really excited about this. It was supposed to happen in the next, couple weeks, but before he could go on this deep sea fishing trip, he was murdered, or he was found dead, whatever you believe. And his friends heard that he was actually in a relationship with a man in Hampton County who was very influential. Obviously, based on kind of all of these rumors, people believed that the person Stephen was in a relationship with was Buster. Now, there's been no indication that Buster is gay. You know, we've seen Buster in trial. He has a girlfriend who's been with him every day in trial, supporting his father. But the mention of an influential man in Hampton County who maybe if was found out to be gay would cause people to gossip or it would look bad on the family was Buster. Now, Buster's never been charged or officially connected to Stephen's death. I don't think he's even been interviewed about this incident. So all of this is really based on a lot of conjecture and rumor around town.
And when you hear the description of this scandal, it feels like it was concocted. It feels like, you know, people were just trying to shoehorn this into this story. This is a mysterious death in the area. There's no real solid information. There's a lot of rumors. People are saying this and people are saying that, and probably doesn't have anything to do with anything. The problem is, during the investigation of Paul and Maggie's death, all of a sudden the state is reopening the investigation into Stephen's death. And they say they're doing it because of information they learned during the investigation. What in the world does that mean?
And remember, you put this together with the fact that, and we don't know if it's true because Randy Murdaugh denies it, but we have Stephen's sister saying that the Murdaughs, who are, you know, the family about town, contact them after Stephen is found dead, offering to represent them. Why? You know, they have a very bustling practice, private practice, where people pay a lot of money to be represented by them. You know, it doesn't seem like they're ambulance chasers looking for a handout to represent people pro bono or for a low fee or out of the goodness of their heart. They're plenty busy. I mean, both of us are lawyers. Like, you're very busy. You're not looking necessarily for free representation because there's already so much going on in your life. They're not busy people.
And look, I don't know. I feel there might have been some involvement in the family in Stephen's death. I think it's a little weird to somehow try and tie Buster back into it. I just don't know. I mean, I thought the Buster thing is really, really, really speculative.
It's a lot of smoke.
It's a lot of smoke, yeah.
In any other situation, if we were just doing an episode on Stephen Smith, I would probably not even mention Buster's name. You know, the fact that it's been the subject of multiple documentaries and whatnot, I don't think we're saying anything new here. But if this were just an episode about Stephen Smith, this is a lot of smoke and it sounds very conspiratorial, except for the fact that the cops specifically said they are reopening this case because of what they found with respect to the investigation into Maggie and Paul's murders. That's weird. And again, they didn't say nothing about Buster. It might have been something to do with Alec.
There's a jail call between Alec and Buster where Alec says something like, people are speculating about Stephen Smith's death, and that obviously didn't have anything to do with you. And Buster's like, yeah, it didn't have anything to do with me. So I think it's quite possible that Alec did have something to do with Stephen Smith's death, but it actually didn't have anything to do with Buster. I think there's a strong possibility that whoever Buster is and whatever Buster is, he is really just a victim in all this. I know there's going to be people who are going to get upset at me even saying that, but look, his brother's been murdered. His mother's been murdered. They probably were killed by his father. I'm not sure what else is going on with his life, but to me, unless there's some sort of concrete evidence tying Buster to this, I think we should probably leave him out of it. Doesn't mean we should leave the Murdaughs out of it, though.
Correct. The Murdaughs are somehow involved in the sense that it seems they've been inserting themselves, you know, into this investigation for whatever reason. It could be lots of different things, but I agree. The Buster piece seems a little, I don't see enough there to implicate him here.
Look, you could more easily convince me that Alec was gay or bi and was in a relationship with Stephen, and Stephen was blackmailing him, than you could that Buster was. I mean, that to me, that just popped into my head, but it seems a lot more likely than anything else. We know what kind of person Alec is. So I don't know. There's a lot of weird stuff going on with this family, and there's a lot of questions. We've talked about the money. Where did all this money go? At some point, the defense is going to claim that Alec had a $50,000 a week drug habit. Unless those Oxycontin were dipped in gold, there's no way he could spend that much money. on Oxy. It's just not possible. Oxy is expensive. It's not $50,000 a week. So there was some money going somewhere that went places that are not entirely clear. And I don't know if we'll ever know the full answer to this, but the state's investigating, and they're investigating based on evidence they learned in this murder. So hopefully one day we'll find out what exactly happened to Stephen.
Well, you've talked about money. And the question is, we know that they're a powerful family and they have a good civil practice, but there is a lot of money flowing through this family with their properties and the way they live. And so obviously at this point, if you've been following the trial, you know that money has a lot to do with the allegations here. So how did they just make all their money? No, that's not the allegation. He's been charged with almost 100 financial crimes, and it didn't just start in the last year or two.
Yes. The story we're about to tell you is just disgusting. It disgusts me really on such a basic level. Whatever the actual facts of Gloria Satterfield's death are, what Alec Murdoch did afterwards is just horrible on so many levels. So Gloria Satterfield was the Murdoch housekeeper. She was more than that. She'd been with the family forever. She basically raised those boys as close as she could be with them. Well, she fell down the brick steps of the home, the Moselle home, the same place where a few years later, Paul and Maggie would be murdered. She had been, as I said, the housekeeper and the nanny for the kids for 20 years. She was a long-term member of this family, and that's what she was. She was a member of the family. According to the 911 call that was made by Maggie shortly after she fell, she had tripped over one of the dogs, and she had fallen and hit her head. And a couple weeks later, she would actually end up passing away from her injuries. She lingered in the hospital for about 3 weeks before she died, but she never regained consciousness. Initially, Alec does something that seems like a very kind gesture. He actually approaches her sons and says, I want to make sure you're taken care of. We loved Gloria. She was a member of the family. I have insurance on my home. Sue me. Sue me, and my insurance will pay for this, and you'll be taken care of the way you should have been. And it won't replace your mom, but at least you'll get some money. And he sends them to, who else? Corey Fleming, best friend, godfather of sons, person who represents other people whenever they seem to be involved with anything with Alec. Well, he is going to represent them. He is the same person who represented Connor Cook. And Fleming does a great job. He gets a settlement from that insurance company for $4.3 million. And he should have sent that money to Forge Consulting, which is the company we've talked about before, which takes this kind of money and ensures that the people who are going to receive it in a way that will take care of them for a very long period of time. But he doesn't send it to Forge Consulting. He sends it to Forge. And as we know, Forge is the fake business Alec opened under the real settlement company's name so he could receive this money and no one would know better. Now, Forge, he had opened several bank accounts and he'd run money through this. But here's the thing about these kind of financial schemes. And Alice has some experience with this. Alice has seen very similar bank frauds to this. But basically, he had a friend at the local bank, Palmetto State Bank. And that man's name was Russell Lafitte. And Russell Lafitte was the president of the bank, and he would run this money into these accounts. And he would move it around, and he would use it to cover debts that Alec had, and basically would benefit as a result of this. Obviously, he and Alec had known each other their whole lives. Russell Lafitte had grown up across the street from him, as a matter of fact. And this was a complex fraud, and all these people were benefiting from this. And so they'd gotten this $4.3 million, but they never even told the kids they got this settlement. They had no idea. They were waiting for the settlement to come through, and they thought it was going to be much less than this, a few $100,000. And they kept getting pushed off, and they kept getting pushed off. Well, Lafitte, he would eventually be charged and convicted in federal court with bank fraud. So he's sort of gotten his when it comes to his role in this fraud. Corey Fleming has also been indicted for his role and is facing a lot of years in prison for his involvement in the various frauds that Alec Murdoch was running. The Satterfields' kids, they didn't even know about the settlement until the explosion of focus on the Murdaughs. They learned about it through the news, basically. I think Mandy Matney, who does the Murdaugh murders, she might have been the first person to report on this. I'm not sure, but In any event, they finally learned about it. One of the sons actually testified in the criminal trial about this. This is part of that 404B evidence that came in. But just regardless of if you think that's the story of how she died, total accident, whatever, just a terrible thing to do to the family of somebody who supposedly was a friend of yours. But that is the lengths to which Alec Murdaugh would go to get money, the money he needed to basically fill the holes that he had created over these 10 years of financial frauds.
And that's such a good point, Brett. Let's not get lost on the first part, which is the financial fraud, which we know happened. And we know it because he admitted to it. And people have already been indicted and convicted in their role in this financial fraud. We'll talk about whether the Murdochs had anything to do with Satterfield's death. But the fact, let's say they didn't. The fact that they would steal $4.3 million from her family when she is a family member to them, she raised their kids, tucked like the Murdoch boys into bed, fed them, probably taught them how to, walk and grow up and be young men. I mean, this is a member of your family and you would do that to them. I mean, that is just... It kind of just belies everything I know about humanity to be able to do that to someone who is essentially a member of your own family. And so I don't want you to get hung up on whether, the Murdochs had anything to do with her death, because we'll go into that in just a moment. But the financial part of it is just sickening. It really shows the character of Alec. And it was knowing, right? Because he can't sue himself or file a claim for insurance on the kids' behalf. He put the seed in their mind to sue him. He knew he was going to do this all along. There was no way he could collect on the insurance if there wasn't a third party, Satterfield's kids, to sue him in order to get this payment. And not even to split it with them, which is still fraud, but just to straight up steal all of it is really disgusting as a moral character sort of thing. But with all that, let's talk about this, because when you steal from someone, obviously it opens up a whole can of worms. And unsurprisingly, people think that Satterfield didn't really fall, that maybe something more pernicious was at play here. They point to the fact that no one mentioned the dogs that she supposedly tripped on the 911 call. And, she is very familiar with the Moselle property. She's been there, for 20 years. She's been around these dogs. She knows what these dogs are like. Of course, accidents can happen, but it's not like she is unfamiliar with the dogs that live on this property. And you would think if something tragic like you trip on a dog, it would be mentioned in the call, because it's tripping versus, say, being pushed or, slipping. They all have different effects on the body. You'd think you'd mention it on a 911 call, but of course, no mention of a dog. And if Maggie had mentioned the dogs, some may argue that doesn't really tell you anything, because she would have been telling you extraneous information to the 911 operator that just wasn't necessary. Now, it's usually a bad idea to kill someone by seriously wounding them and then sending them off in an ambulance, hoping that they die rather than recovering and telling the cops what you did. But as you see in this case, even though Satterfield never regained consciousness, she was alive for another 3 weeks. So, I say all this of course people are conspiracy minded and thinking the Murdaughs had to have something to do with it. But I think what we have surrounding the 911 call and the fact that she does stay alive for 3 weeks after kind of cuts against any sort of planned murder here for insurance fraud. But what is certainly the case is that, like we said, Alec stole her money and others, and he didn't resign from his law firm. He was fired after misappropriating funds. Alex stole from the families of lots of people, not just his own nanny and longtime housekeeper. I'm going to call her his family member, because that's basically as close as you can get to a family member who's not actually family. I think by looking at his financial misdeeds, we see the type of person he is. He just has no qualms about who he goes after, because he stole money from the family of a quadriplegic, a woman who died in an ambulance wreck, a trooper who was injured on the job. And honestly, that's just the start of the type of people that he stole from. Because of his position in the law firm, people come to him when they're at their lowest, when they need help and they need someone to trust. and he took advantage of that. The amount that Alex stole is conservatively estimated at $10 million. And he faces at least 90 charges, and honestly, it's probably going to increase. There's probably going to be more charges just for financial fraud alone.
And I think Alice is right. I don't think people should assume just because Alec Murdaugh is a really bad, terrible person who stole from a lot of people, that means that Maggie and Paul would have been complicit in murdering this woman. I think this was an accident. I think she did die by an accident. I don't think she was murdered. I don't think she was pushed. It'd be a really weird way to kill somebody. And as Al said, you'd have to really hope she didn't regain consciousness in those 3 weeks and say, Maggie pushed me, or whatever. I don't think she was murdered, but I think this is the kind of person Alec is. He saw this happen, and the very first thing he thought was how to take advantage of it for his own benefit. That's what he did. And that's the story, I think, when it comes to this case. It's just another window into the soul of this man. And those of you who've watched this trial, and the thing keeping you from feeling like he did this is how could someone kill their wife and child? I think what you see in Alec Murdaugh is somebody who will do whatever they think benefits them. That's his calculus for how he makes decisions. And this is evidence of that. She wasn't murdered. This was an accident, but it quickly turned into just yet another one of his frauds. It wasn't just strangers that he was willing to do this to. He did this to a member of the family. And I think Alice is right. She was a member of the family.
And I think shows you that, a lot of people have said, well, he cared about Buster. That's why he arranged for himself to be shot so that he could provide for Buster, this and that. I think we're looking at it completely through the wrong lens. He displays classic traits of a narcissist. Everything is through his eyes of number one, not his sons, not his wife, not his, longtime nanny family member. Even if this was a complete accident, which I think very likely it was, that she accidentally fell and tragically passed away, he's not mourning her. Like, his narcissistic tendency is not allowing him to be sad or actually have his heart go out to her children who have lost, their mother and might be in financial straits. All he can think about is how can number one benefit from this? And that's the way his mind works. And that begins to shed light on how someone like him could pull the trigger on his own flesh and blood.
Well, like I said, there's a lot of people who've dug a lot deeper into this. If you want to dive all the way down the rabbit hole, check out some of those other podcasts and you can learn even more about these cases. These things inform everything else that's happening, but they're not the main story. And next week, we're going to get into that main story. We're really going to dig into the trial and the evidence that we've learned at the trial and what it tells us about what happened on June 7th to Maggie and Paul. I'm sure you guys have thoughts. Shoot us an email, prosecutorspod@gmail.com, @prosecutorspod for all your social media. Can't wait to hear from you guys. I know y'all have been loving this trial. We've heard a lot of you on the gallery and on Patreon who've wanted to talk about this, and we love talking about it with you, and we hope that more of you will join us in this discussion. Well, Alice, is there anything else you want to say before we sign off?
No, I'm glad we got through kind of all these salacious kind of sidebars in a way. I think they're important, but I don't think they're important because it's necessarily that the Murdaughs are some big, cartel that have dealt death all over the Low Country. I don't think it's that. I think what has been very enlightening about these other sidebars is that they do touch the Murdaughs in some way. There's a lot of smoke, but I think it really gives you an insight into the way this family views itself within the community and how they have been able to stay out of the fray despite having a lot of smoke surrounding their family and probably had some involvement in less than, above board things. I don't think it's necessarily that they are this family that has murdered a bunch of people around them. But I think there's enough facts in there to really shed light on the type of people and the type of family and the type of person that Alec is that will come into play when you are faced with the question of whether he is the one who killed his wife and son.
Alice is always nailing it, and we're going to talk more about that next time, but we'll have to see if Alice has a baby between now and then. We're not going to record the next episode 5 minutes after this, so there's an actual possibility that after this episode, Alice could have a baby. We're just going to say it's baby watch all the time. Certainly by the time you hear this. If Alice hadn't had that baby by the time you hear this,
something's wrong.
We got problems. But we're going to see. We'll keep you informed. So, check on Twitter to see whether the baby was born or not. But we'll be back next week, one way or the other, with more on the Murdaugh case and getting involved in that trial. But until then, I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the prosecutors.
There is no cold water prosecuting on this case, because this case is just as crazy as everyone says it is.
It really is. I mean, that's what I was saying, when we talked to Bob. There's no conspiracy theory that you couldn't convince me of in this case.
I know. Because the whole thing seems, the facts are so crazy in this case that it sounds like a conspiracy theory already in the things that are already factual.
The only reason I don't think it's the cartel is because the cartel is not dumb enough to do it. Alec Murdoch could be involved in the cartel. Yeah, well, I just want to get far enough that if you had the baby tomorrow, you'd have a couple weeks to recover so we could finish Murdoch.
And I appreciate that. You're so just, nice for letting me recover.
Yeah, you get a couple days. I mean, I just need to get, like I said, one of those portable mics and just bring it to the hospital.
All month long on PlutoTV, stream the biggest Tyler Perry movies free. Watch your favorites like Medea's Witness Protection and Medea's Big Happy Family. Join Tyler Perry as he goes on a couples retreat with Sharon Leal in Why Did I Get Married? Or Idris Elba and Gabrielle Union in the Tyler Perry directed film Daddy's Little Girls. Plus, PlutoTV has hundreds of channels with thousands more movies and TV shows available on live and on demand. Download the free